The Positive Theory of Capital by Eugen von Bohm-Bawerk. Book 1. The Nature and Conception of Capital. Chapter 4. The True Conception of Capital. Political economists have not, as a rule, been noted for the unanimity of their definitions, but here the differences in the interpretation of the conception are so excessive as to suggest that there may be something quite peculiar about the objects of dispute. I think Keynes has quite correctly estimated the peculiar position of the case when he says that there is something else in it that is ordinarily scientific dispute as to whether a particular definition is happy or unfortunate, or indeed true or false. It is not the definition that is the matter of dispute, but the thing defined, or, as I should prefer to say, the terminology. The material difference in the definitions is not so much that the one thing to be defined appears to each one in a different light, as that each one is defining an entirely different thing, and thus definitions that are really incompatible come within the same ring-fence, because each one claims the expression capital for the object he is defining. It is clear that, while this circumstance may explain the striking divergence of opinions, it makes it, unfortunately, more difficult to decide between them. For in questions of nomenclature there is, strictly speaking, neither right nor wrong. There is, therefore, nothing to compel conviction. There is only an appeal to a greater or less appropriateness, and people may, to a considerable extent, remain of different opinions as to the appropriateness. All the same it is clear that our controversy must be settled. It is impossible that economic science can for all time allow its representatives liberty to call 10 or 11 fundamentally different things by the same name. Political economy requires clear thinking, and for that the prerequisites are clear ideas and clear speech. We must come to an agreement, and it will be come to exactly as men have agreed and continue to agree over the innumerable disputes to which the nomenclature of the descriptive natural sciences, zoology, botany, mineralogy, geography, continually give rise. The majority unite, and slowly but surely leave the dissensions, and pass to the order of the day. But on which of the numerous readings of our conception of capital can we hope to unite unprejudiced persons? To my mind, if we have once realized the nature of the controversy as pre-eminently one of terminology, we shall not find it so difficult to decide as the amount of confusion up till now might lead one to suppose. Happily there cannot be much doubt as to certain leading principles that have to be observed in questions of terminology. If these are impartially acted upon, the great majority of the competing definitions will be definitely thrown out, and there will not remain more than 2 or 3 between which there need be any real hesitation. And even in this short lead, the arguments of appropriateness which must decide are so unequally distributed, that, though we may not be able actually to force a universal acceptance of one definite conception, as it is, after all, only appropriateness that must guide us, yet we may confidently look for the voluntary adhesion of a vast majority. The leading principles we have to observe seem to me to be as follows. First and chiefly, it is quite clear that our readings of the conception must be logically unassailable; that is to say, it must not contradict itself, and it must apply to the object which it possesses to define. Then we must not be spendthrift in our terminology; that is to say, we must not attach the name capital to and make it synonymous with a conception that already has a name, while other suggestive conceptions, to which naturally the word would equally well apply, have to do without any name. Thirdly, the conception we adopt must be scientifically important and scientifically useful. Lastly and not least, unless an alteration be urgently demanded on some grounds of logic or appropriateness, the name of capital must be left to that conception for which it has been longest and most generally used. Or, to put it in a more roundabout way, as things are at present, everybody treats of the most weighty theoretical and social problems under the general names of problems of capital. That being so, the word capital, wherever possible, should be so used as to spare us the aggravated difficulties that will attend the greatest controverted questions of the day, if we rebaptize their terms. In view of these rules I would suggest the following as the most adequate solution of the controversy. Capital in general we shall call a group of products, which serve as means to the acquisition of goods. Under this general conception, we shall put that of social capital as narrower conception. Social capital we shall call a group of products which serve as means to the socio-economical acquisition of goods, or as this acquisition is only possible through production. We shall call it a group of products destined to serve towards further production, or, briefly, a group of intermediate products. Synonymous with the wider of the two conceptions, the term acquisitive capital may be very suitably used, or less suitably but more in accordance with usage the term private capital. Social capital, again, the narrower of the two conceptions, may be well and concisely called productive capital. The following are my reasons for this classification. Capital in its wider sense and capital in its narrower sense both mark out categories which, economically, are of the highest importance. Products which serve to acquisitive ends possesses a pre-eminent importance for the theory of income as being the source of interest, while the intermediate products possesses at least as great an importance for the theory of production. The distinction between production from hand to mouth and production which employs roundabout and fruitful methods is so fundamental that it is eminently desirable that a special conception should be coined for the latter. This is done, if not, as we shall see, in the only possible way, yet in a way that is not inappropriate, in grouping together under the conception of capital the intermediate products, which come into existence in the course of this roundabout production. Again, the solution suggested is the most conservative one, without laying any particular weight on the fact that the historical origin of the word capital indicates a relation to the acquisition or a gain, and that our reading remains true to this. It preserves the double relation, the relation to acquisition of interest on the one side and to production on the other, which was imported into the conception of capital by Adam Smith, and since his time has been adopted into scientific usage. It is no inconsiderable advantage, then, that we do not require to create a majority in its favor by a revolution in terminology. The majority is already with us, and the conception may easily be carried unanimously, if we add some new unbiased members. Here too it is worthy of particular attention that those writers who have occupied themselves professedly and most profoundly with investigation of the conception of capital and its problems, have ended, almost without exception, by adopting exactly the same conception, or at least one which comes very close to it. Connected with this is the further advantage that we avoid a puzzling change of the name for the two classes of problems which are both treated of now under the name of problems of capital. The popular name is retained, both for the factor of production and for the source of interest. And finally, it seems to me no small advantage that, notwithstanding the material difference there is between capital, the factor of production, and capital, the source of interest, it is not necessary in our reading of it to make two conceptions of capital that are entirely foreign to one another, and have nothing more in common than cat has with category. Our two conceptions have just enough in common to allow of their being formally coupled under one common definition, and then distinguished as narrower and wider conceptions. True, their connection is not an intimate one, and in the light of what has been said, it cannot be so. It rests simply on the accidental circumstances that for society as a whole, which cannot acquire except through producing, the goods which constitute the produced means of acquisition coincide with the goods which constitute the produced means of production. It will be noted that I use the phrase social capital, and not the common expression national capital. I do so for this reason, that for a limited community the means of acquisition embrace not only productive goods, but consumption goods, lent to foreign countries. Those who hold by the conception of national capital then must either take in the above-named consumption goods along with productive goods, thereby arriving at a very uninteresting conception indeed, or if they mean to confine it to productive goods only, they must build their national conception on a quite independent basis, and break off all logical connection with the other conception, which would at any rate be a doubtful policy. Our social capital avoids both these difficulties.